In the heart of the unforgiving desert, where most men fear to tread alone, one cowboy's simple act of kindness would forever change the fate of humanity. When Jake Martinez discovered a dying creature beneath the scorching sun, he made a choice that defied all logic and survival instinct. He shared his last water and food with something not of this world. What he couldn't know was that his compassion would summon an army from the stars, 180 alien warriors materializing at dawn, ready to repay a debt of honor that transcended galaxies. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Arizona Badlands as Jake Martinez guided his weathered mare through the endless expanse of red sand and twisted mesquite. At 43 years old, Jake had spent most of his life in these desolate lands, working cattle on the Rodriguez Ranch, one of the last family-owned operations that still ran livestock the old way, without drones or satellite tracking. His leathery skin and squinting eyes told the story of decades under the relentless desert sun, and his calloused hands bore the marks of honest, brutal work. Jake wasn't like the younger ranch hands who spent their nights in town drinking and chasing excitement. He preferred the solitude of the open range, where a man could think without interruption, where the only sounds were the wind whistling through canyon walls and the occasional cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. Some called him a loner. Others said he was running from something. The truth was simpler. Jake had seen enough of humanity's chaos during his 2 tours in Afghanistan, and the desert's silence was the only medicine that eased the memories that still haunted his sleep. On this particular evening, Jake was 3 days into checking the northern fence line, a task that required riding nearly 60 miles through some of the most inhospitable terrain in the Southwest. His supplies were running low, just enough water for 2 more days if he rationed carefully, and food for perhaps 3 meals. The Mar, a sturdy Mustang mix named Copper, plodded along with the patience of an animal that understood the desert's demands. They had been through worse together. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple, Jake noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a mirage. The desert was famous for playing tricks on a man's eyes when exhaustion and heat took their toll. But as he drew closer, squinting against the glare, he realized he was looking at something real, something that didn't belong in this landscape. There, collapsed in a shallow depression between 2 massive boulders, was a figure unlike anything Jake had ever encountered. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but distinctly alien in every other aspect. The creature's skin shimmered with an iridescent quality, shifting between deep purples and silvery blues, even in the fading light. It was tall, perhaps 7 feet if it could stand, with elongated limbs that seemed too delicate for its frame. Its head was larger than a human's, with enormous eyes that were now half closed in what appeared to be extreme distress. Jake's military training kicked in immediately. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle secured to his saddle, his body tensing for potential danger. For a long moment, he sat frozen on Copper, weighing his options. Every rational instinct told him to ride away, to report what he'd seen to the authorities, to let someone else deal with whatever this was. The government had facilities for this kind of thing, secret places in Nevada, where they supposedly handled extraterrestrial matters, if the conspiracy theorists were to be believed. But as Jake watched, the creature made a sound, a weak, whistling breath that spoke of suffering in any language. Its chest rose and fell with obvious difficulty, and one of its elongated hands twitched slightly against the sand. In that moment, Jake didn't see an alien being or a potential threat. He saw a living thing in desperate need of help, and 20 years of working with animals had taught him to recognize genuine distress when he saw it. Dismounting slowly, Jake approached with caution, his hand still near his weapon, but no longer gripping it. The creature's eyes fluttered open as he drew near, revealing irises of liquid silver that seemed to reflect not just light but something deeper: intelligence, awareness, and unmistakable fear. Jake had seen that look before, in the eyes of wounded soldiers on the battlefield, in the faces of lost calves separated from their mothers, in his own reflection during the darkest nights of his life. "Easy now," Jake murmured, using the same calm tone he employed with spooked horses. "I'm not gonna hurt you." The alien's body tensed, and for a moment Jake thought it might try to flee or fight despite its obvious weakness. But then something remarkable happened. The creature's expression shifted, if its strange features could be read that way, from fear to something that looked almost like hope. It made another sound, this one less pained, almost questioning. Jake knelt in the sand beside the being, close enough now to see that its skin was covered in fine, scale-like patterns that caught the dying light. He could smell something strange too, not unpleasant, but utterly foreign, like ozone mixed with something sweet and metallic. The creature was clearly dehydrated and starving, its body trembling with weakness. Without allowing himself to overthink the decision, Jake unslung his canteen from his belt. He had perhaps 2 quarts of water, left barely enough to get himself and Copper back to the ranch house if they pushed hard. Sharing it with this creature might be signing his own death warrant in this unforgiving land. But Jake had made harder choices before, and he'd learned long ago that a man could survive almost anything except betraying his own conscience. He held the canteen to the alien's lips, if they could be called lips, a thin slit that opened to reveal something that might have been a mouth. The creature hesitated for just a moment, those silver eyes locked on Jake's weathered face, and then it drank. The water seemed to revive it almost immediately, some of the shimmer returning to its dulled skin. When the creature had drunk about half of what remained, Jake pulled the canteen away gently and took out his last package of beef jerky and hardtack biscuits. "Not exactly gourmet," Jake said quietly, breaking the jerky into smaller pieces, "but it'll keep you alive." He wasn't even sure if the alien could process human food, but he offered it anyway, placing pieces carefully near those strange, delicate hands. The creature grasped the food with surprising dexterity, despite its weakness, and brought it to its mouth. As it ate, some color seemed to return to its features, and its breathing became more regular. As Jake sat in the sand beside this impossible being, sharing the last of his provisions under a sky that was rapidly filling with stars, he wondered what in God's name he'd just gotten himself into. The desert night was already growing cold, and he had no idea what the morning would bring. All he knew was that he'd made a choice, the only choice his conscience would allow, and whatever came next, he'd face it the way he faced everything, with quiet determination and the hope that doing right was worth whatever price had to be paid. The alien's eyes remained fixed on Jake's face as the darkness deepened, and in their silver depths, the old cowboy thought he saw something that transcended the vast emptiness between worlds, recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. Neither of them could have known that this simple act of mercy would set in motion events that would change not just their lives, but the destiny of Earth itself. The temperature dropped rapidly as the desert night took hold, and Jake found himself facing decisions he'd never imagined having to make. The alien creature remained too weak to move on its own, and leaving it exposed to the brutal cold would undo whatever good his provisions had done. Drawing on his military field experience and years of desert survival, Jake set about creating a shelter using his bedroll, saddle blanket, and the natural protection offered by the boulder formation. Copper watched with cautious curiosity as Jake worked, her ears flicking nervously whenever the alien moved. Horses had an uncanny sense for danger, and Jake trusted the Mara's instincts almost as much as his own. The fact that Copper wasn't completely panicked was a good sign. She was wary, yes, but not terrified. That told Jake something important about their unexpected companion. As he worked, Jake couldn't help but study the creature more closely. In the starlight, its skin continued that mesmerizing color shift, and he noticed patterns that seemed almost like tattoos or natural markings running along its arms and neck, geometric designs that might have been decorative or might serve some function he couldn't comprehend. The alien's breathing had steadied, but it still seemed extremely weak, occasionally making soft sounds that Jake interpreted as pain or discomfort. "You got a name?" Jake asked quietly, knowing full well he wouldn't get an answer he could understand. "I'm Jake. Jake Martinez. Probably doesn't mean much to you, but it feels wrong not to introduce myself properly." The alien's head turned toward him at the sound of his voice, those enormous silver eyes reflecting the starlight like mirrors. Then something extraordinary happened. The creature lifted one of its long-fingered hands and touched its own chest, making it sound a complex series of tones that might have been a name in whatever language it spoke. The sound was beautiful in its strangeness, like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. Jake nodded respectfully. "All right then. I can't pronounce that, so I hope you don't mind if I call you Silver, on account of your eyes." The alien Silver made another sound, softer this time, and Jake chose to interpret it as acceptance. It was absurd, sitting in the desert having a one-sided conversation with an extraterrestrial being. But Jake had spent enough nights talking to Copper and the stars that it didn't feel entirely unnatural. As the hours passed, Jake found himself telling Silver about his life, the ranch, the endless work, the satisfaction of a job done right even when no one was watching. He talked about his time in the service, though he skipped the worst parts, and about why he'd chosen to come back to the desert instead of settling in a city where life might have been easier. He wasn't sure why he was sharing so much with a creature that probably couldn't understand a word, but there was something about those attentive eyes that made him feel heard in a way he hadn't felt in years. Silver seemed to grow stronger as the night wore on, though still far from healthy. The alien began making more sounds, some of which seemed almost conversational, as if it were trying to communicate back. At one point, it lifted a hand and pointed toward the sky, tracing patterns among the stars with a long, delicate finger. Jake followed the gesture, wondering if Silver was pointing to its home, some distant star system that existed only as a pinprick of light from Earth's perspective. "Long way from home, aren't you?" Jake murmured. "Yeah, I know that feeling. Different kind of distance, maybe, but I get it." Around midnight, something changed. Silver became agitated, its body tensing as those silver eyes fixed on something Jake couldn't see. The alien struggled to sit up, making urgent sounds and gesturing emphatically toward the northern horizon. Jake felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, that old combat instinct that had saved his life more than once. "What is it?" he asked, his hand moving to his rifle. "Something coming?" Copper whinnied nervously, stamping her hooves and pulling against her tether. Jake scanned the darkness, but saw nothing except the endless expanse of sand and rock illuminated by starlight. Whatever Silver sensed was beyond human perception, but the alien's distress was genuine. The creature seemed torn between fear and something else, determination, perhaps, or duty. Then Jake saw a flash of light on the horizon, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. But Silver's reaction confirmed it was real. The alien made a sound like a sigh, or perhaps a prayer, its body relaxing slightly, though the tension didn't entirely leave its frame. Jake waited, rifle ready, his heart pounding as he tried to prepare for whatever might emerge from the darkness. But nothing came. Whatever Silver had sensed either passed by or retreated, and gradually the alien calmed, though it kept glancing toward the northern horizon as if expecting something to return. Jake didn't lower his guard for another hour, and even then, he kept the rifle within easy reach as he finally allowed himself to sit down again. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Jake said, though he had no idea where that might be. "Come daylight, we'll figure something out. The ranch house is too far, but there's an old line shack about 10 miles east. We can make it there if you can sit a horse." Silver looked at him, and Jake would have sworn the alien understood at least the intent behind his words, if not the words themselves. The creature placed one hand over its chest in a gesture that seemed almost like a salute or a thank you, and Jake nodded in return. As the night dragged on toward dawn, Jake dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, every movement. Silver remained quiet, occasionally making soft sounds that might have been discomfort or might have been something like sleep. Copper settled down eventually, though she kept herself positioned between Jake and the alien protective instinct overriding her nervousness. Jake found himself thinking about what this all meant. If aliens existed and the evidence was literally lying 6 feet away from him, then what else might be out there? Were they visitors, explorers, or something more concerning? Silver didn't seem hostile, but that didn't mean others of its kind would be friendly. And what had caused Silver to crash or become stranded in the desert in the first place? Had there been an accident, an attack, or something else? The questions multiplied faster than Jake could process them, and he realized that come morning, his simple life was going to get a whole lot more complicated. He should call the authorities, report what he'd found. That was the responsible thing to do. But looking at Silver, seeing the vulnerability in those alien features, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that turning this being over to the government would be a betrayal of the trust that seemed to have formed between them. As the sky began to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep purple, Jake made his decision. He'd get Silver to the line shack, make sure the alien was safe and as comfortable as possible, and then he'd ride to the ranch and figure out his next move. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than sitting in the open desert waiting for whatever Silver had sensed in the night to return. He stood and stretched, his joints protesting after hours sitting on the cold ground. Copper nickered softly, sensing that movement was coming. Silver's eyes opened, and the alien struggled to sit up, determination evident in every movement despite obvious weakness. "Easy there," Jake said, moving to help. "We've got a ride ahead of us, and I need you to hang on." As he helped Silver to its feet, the alien was indeed tall, probably 7.5 feet when fully upright. Jake noticed something he'd missed in the darkness. Around Silver's neck was something that looked like jewelry, but hummed with a faint energy Jake could feel even without touching it. Some kind of technology, perhaps, or something that served both practical and ceremonial purposes. Getting Silver onto Copper was a challenge. The Mara's patient but clearly uncomfortable with the situation, and Silver's unfamiliarity with horses made the whole process awkward. Finally, Jake managed to get the alien settled, with Silver's arms wrapped around Jake's waist as he sat in front, guiding the horse. They set out as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Jake didn't look back at their campsite, focusing instead on the path ahead and the strange weight of the alien presence behind him. He had no idea what the coming hours would bring, no sense of the cosmic machinery he'd set in motion with his simple act of kindness. Behind them, in the sand where Silver had lain, a faint pattern glowed briefly in the dawn light symbols and designs that might have been a message or a beacon. The light faded quickly, absorbed back into the earth, but not before sending its signal out into the vast emptiness of space, traveling at speeds that defied human understanding, carrying news of mercy shown and debts to be repaid. The desert held its secrets close, but soon those secrets would explode into the light of day in ways that would test everything Jake believed about courage, loyalty, and what it meant to do the right thing in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The line shack appeared on the horizon, just as Jake was beginning to worry that Silver might not make it. The alien had grown increasingly weak during the ride, its grip around Jake's waist loosening several times until the cowboy had to stop and readjust their position. Copper was exhausted too, carrying double weight across difficult terrain, and Jake himself felt the bone-deep weariness that came from a sleepless night and mounting tension. The shack was a weathered structure of wood and corrugated metal, built decades ago as a temporary shelter for cowboys working the far reaches of the ranch. It had a single room, a wood stove that probably hadn't been used in years, and a cot with a thin mattress that had seen better days. But it had walls and a roof, which made it a palace compared to sleeping exposed in the desert. Jake helped Silver down from the horse and into the shack, settling the alien onto the cot. In the morning light streaming through gaps in the walls, Silver looked worse than the night before, skin color fading to a dull gray. Breathing shallow, those remarkable eyes dimmed with exhaustion. Jake felt a surge of worry that surprised him with its intensity. In just one night, he'd come to care about this creature's survival in a way that went beyond simple humanitarian concern. "Hang on," Jake said, though he knew Silver couldn't understand. "I'm going to get you more water. See if there's anything stored here we can use." The shack's cupboard yielded some ancient canned beans, a half-empty box of ammunition that wouldn't fit Jake's rifle, and a jar of instant coffee that had probably been there since the Reagan administration. But there was also a hand pump outside that drew from a deep well, and after several minutes of vigorous pumping to clear the line, cold, clean water flowed freely. Jake filled his canteen and a dented metal bucket he'd found, bringing both inside for Silver. The alien drank gratefully, and Jake was encouraged to see some color returning to that strange, beautiful skin. He sat on an upturned crate, watching Silver rest, trying to formulate his next move. The ranch house was still 30 miles away, too far to reach before nightfall if he pushed Copper that hard. But he needed to report in eventually, or someone would come looking for him. And then how would he explain? The sound came first, a deep thrumming that Jake felt in his chest before he consciously heard it. It was like thunder but continuous, growing louder with each passing second. Copper whinnied in alarm from where she was tethered outside, and Jake jumped to his feet, rifle in hand, heart hammering as he moved to the shack's small window. What he saw made his mind rebel against the evidence of his eyes. The sky above the desert was splitting open. That was the only way Jake could describe it. The air itself seemed to tear like fabric, revealing something behind reality that glowed with impossible colors. And through that tear, they came. Ships. Dozens of them. Sleek, angular craft that looked like they'd been carved from single pieces of metal that caught the morning sun and reflected it in ways that hurt to look at directly. They descended in perfect formation, moving with a grace that defied physics as Jake understood it, making no sound except that deep thrumming that resonated in his bones. Jake's military training screamed at him to run, to hide, to do something other than stand frozen in terror and wonder. But his legs wouldn't obey, and all he could do was watch as the ship settled onto the desert floor around the line shack, not landing so much as simply becoming stationary a few feet above the ground. For a moment, nothing happened. The world hung suspended in that thrumming silence. Then, as one, hatches opened in the sides of the ships, and they emerged. Warriors. There was no other word for them. Beings like Silver, but taller, more powerfully built. Their skin shifting through deeper colors, midnight blues, forest greens, deep crimsons. They wore armor that seemed to be made from the same material as their ships, form-fitting and clearly advanced beyond anything Earth had produced. And they were arm-carrying weapons that looked like spears and staffs but hummed with energy that suggested they were far more than primitive implements. Jake counted them as they assembled in the open ground before the shack. 50, 75, 100. The number kept growing until he reached 180, at which point he stopped counting and simply stared in disbelief. An army had materialized in the Arizona desert, standing at attention in perfect ranks, their silver eyes all fixed on the weathered line shack where Jake stood with his rifle feeling more useless than a toy. One figure stepped forward from the ranks, clearly a leader. This one was taller than the others, with armor that bore markings similar to the patterns Jake had seen on Silver's skin. The leader approached the shack, and Jake found himself backing up instinctively, his rifle raised, though he knew it would be worse than useless against this force. The leader stopped at the shack's door and spoke a series of musical tones that sounded like Silver's speech, but deeper, more commanding. Jake didn't understand a word, but he understood the intent. This wasn't an attack. This was something else. Behind Jake, Silver made a sound, the strongest vocalization the alien had managed since Jake had found it. The leader's expression changed, and it pushed past Jake with surprising gentleness, moving to kneel beside the cot where Silver lay. A rapid exchange of sounds followed, Silver's weak but urgent, the leader's increasingly concerned. Jake watched, still gripping his rifle but lowering it slowly as the situation became clearer. Silver wasn't just any alien. The deference the warriors showed, the leader's obvious concern, the massive response to finding this one being Silver was important. Maybe royalty. Maybe a scientist or religious figure. Jake didn't know enough to understand the nuances, but he understood enough to realize he'd saved someone these warriors considered worth assembling an army to rescue. The leader stood and turned to Jake, those eyes copper-colored, he noticed, not silver, fixing on the cowboy with an intensity that made Jake's breath catch. Then the being did something that would replay in Jake's memory for the rest of his life. It placed a fist over its chest, bowed its head slightly, and held that position for a long moment. When it raised its head again, it spoke in that musical language, and though Jake didn't understand the words, he understood the meaning. "Thank you." The leader gestured, and several of the warriors entered the shack, moving with practiced efficiency. They had medical equipment, at least. Jake assumed that's what the strange devices were, and they began treating Silver with obvious expertise. Jake backed into a corner, giving them room, his mind reeling as he tried to process what was happening. More warriors approached through the door, and Jake tensed before realizing they were bringing gifts. That was the only word for it. They placed objects at Jake's feet, pieces of technology he couldn't begin to understand, containers that might hold food or medicine, and one object that looked like a crystal but pulsed with internal light. The warriors would place their gifts, bow their heads like their leader had done, and return to their positions outside. It dawned on Jake slowly, the magnitude of what had occurred. He hadn't just helped a lost alien. He'd saved someone these warriors loved or served, and in their culture, that debt demanded repayment. The 180 warriors assembled outside weren't a search party or a rescue team. They were an honor guard, a statement of the value placed on the life Jake had preserved. Silver was being carefully lifted by the medical team, placed on some kind of stretcher that floated without visible support. The leader approached Jake again, and this time it reached out slowly, giving Jake time to pull back if he wanted. Jake held still, and the leader placed something in his hand, a small device, smooth and warm, that fit perfectly in his palm. The leader spoke again, tapping the device and then pointing to its own chest, then to the sky. A communicator, Jake realized. A way to call them if he ever needed help. The leader was giving him a direct line to an alien civilization as payment for sharing water and beef jerky with a dying stranger. The absurdity of it almost made Jake laugh, but the solemnity of the moment held him. Instead, he nodded, closing his hand around the device. "I didn't do it for payment," he said quietly. "I did it because it was right." The leader tilted its head, studying Jake with those copper eyes, and Jake could have sworn he saw understanding there. Maybe they didn't share a language, but some truths transcended words. Compassion, honor, duty. These concepts existed across the vast emptiness of space, binding thinking beings together regardless of their origin. Silver was being carried toward one of the ships, but the alien made a sound, and the procession stopped. Despite obvious weakness, Silver gestured urgently, and after a brief exchange, the leader brought Silver's floating stretcher closer to Jake. The alien looked at him with those silver eyes, clearer now after treatment but still weak, and made a series of sounds that Jake knew he'd remember. even if he never learned their meaning. Silver reached out, and Jake took the offered hand, surprised by its warmth and the strength of the grip despite the alien's condition. They stayed like that for a moment, two beings from different worlds connected by a simple act of kindness and the universal language of gratitude. Then Silver was carried away, borne toward the waiting ship by warriors who treated their charge with obvious reverence and care. The leader was the last aboard, but before entering the ship, it turned back to Jake and spoke one more time. Then it raised a hand, not a wave, but something more formal, a salute perhaps, or a blessing. Jake, acting on instinct, returned the gesture. The ships rose as silently as they had descended, that deep thrumming building again as they climbed into the morning sky. The tier in reality opened once more, and one by one, the ships passed through it, heading toward destinations Jake couldn't imagine. Within minutes, they were gone, the tier ceiling behind them, leaving nothing but disturbed sand and Jake standing in front of a weathered line shack, holding an alien communicator and wondering if he'd lost his mind. Copper nickered, and Jake walked over to her on shaking legs, leaning against the mare's solid warmth as reaction set in. He just made first contact with an alien civilization. An army had appeared to thank him for showing mercy to one of their own. And now he held in his hand the power to call down forces beyond Earth's understanding. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the desert returned to its normal rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But Jake knew better. His simple act of kindness had rippled outward in ways he was only beginning to comprehend, and the device warm against his palm was proof that the universe was vastly stranger, more wonderful and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Jake didn't go back to the ranch house. Not right away. Instead, he sat on the wooden steps of the line shack for hours, the alien communicator resting in his lap, his mind struggling to integrate what he'd witnessed into any framework that made sense. Copper grazed nearby, seemingly unbothered now that the aliens had departed, as if she'd already processed and moved past the morning as impossible events with the pragmatic wisdom that animals possessed. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and the desert heat built around him, but Jake barely noticed. He kept replaying the sequence of events, looking for the moment when reality had shifted, when his ordinary life had intersected with something vast and cosmic. Had it been when he decided to stop and investigate the figure in the sand? Or had it been predetermined, some invisible thread of fate drawing him to that exact spot at that exact time? He examined the communicator closely in the daylight. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No buttons or screens. Just a smooth surface that shifted colors like silver skin had, pulsing with a gentle inner light. When Jake held it, it felt warm and somehow alive, and he wondered if it was responding to his touch, his body heat, or something more subtle like his thoughts or intentions. What would happen if he activated it? Would the ships return? Would he be speaking directly to Silver, or the copper-eyed leader, or some vast alien command structure? The responsibility of it weighed on him. This wasn't like the radio back at the ranch house, where he could call for help with a down fence or injured cattle. This was a connection to beings who commanded technology that made humanity look like children playing with sticks in the dirt. And that raised troubling questions. If aliens possessed such advanced technology, such obvious power, why had Silver been alone and dying in the desert? Had it been an accident, an exploration gone wrong? Or had Silver been fleeing from something? Jake remembered the alien's agitation in the night, the way it had sensed something approaching that Jake's human senses couldn't detect. Had there been danger nearby, some threat that had caused Silver's distress? The gifts the warriors had left were piled inside the shack, and Jake finally roused himself to examine them more carefully. Most were completely beyond his comprehension, smooth objects that hummed or glowed, containers filled with substances he couldn't identify. But one item caught his attention, a flat panel about the size of his hand that showed moving images when he picked it up. The images told a story. Jake didn't understand the written symbols that appeared alongside the visuals, but the pictures themselves were clear enough. He saw worlds, planets that weren't Earth, with strange landscapes and unusual skies. He saw beings like Silver and the warriors, going about daily lives that seemed simultaneously alien and familiar. They worked, they gathered, they appeared to celebrate and mourn. They were people, Jake realized. Not humans, but people nonetheless, with lives and loves and purposes that mattered to them as much as his life mattered to him. Then the images shifted to something darker. A threat shown as ships of a different design, angular and predatory, moving through space like sharks through water. Battle scenes followed, confusing and violent, where ships like the ones Jake had seen were engaged in desperate combat against superior numbers. The images conveyed a clear message. Silver's people were at war. Jake set the panel down carefully, his understanding of the situation crystallizing into something both clearer and more troubling. Silver hadn't crashed in the desert by accident. The alien had been running, fleeing from enemies, and had nearly died in the attempt. Jake's intervention hadn't just saved a life, it had saved someone important in the middle of an interstellar conflict. And the warrior's appearance had been both gratitude and strategic response. The communicator in his lap suddenly felt heavier. These people, Silver's people, were fighting for their survival against an enemy Jake knew nothing about. By saving Silver, had Jake inadvertently entangled Earth in an alien war? Were those predatory ships now aware of Earth's location? Did Silver's presence in the desert put humanity at risk? The questions multiplied, each more troubling than the last. Jake stood and paced, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust. He needed advice, needed to tell someone what had happened. But who? If he went to the authorities, they'd take the communicator, probably lock him up for observation, and definitely involve the military. The thought of generals and politicians getting their hands on this connection to an advanced alien civilization made Jake's stomach turn. Humanity wasn't ready for this. Hell, Jake wasn't ready for this. But keeping it secret felt equally wrong. This was bigger than one cowboy's decision. This was first contact, proof of extraterrestrial life, and potentially the opening move in a cosmic conflict that could sweep across Earth like wildfire. Did Jake have the right to make decisions about something this monumental on his own? He thought about Silver's eyes, the gratitude and trust he'd seen there. He thought about the copper-eyed leader's bow, the respect shown by those 180 warriors. They had chosen to trust him, to give him this gift and this burden. They could have just taken Silver and left, owing humanity nothing. Instead, they had acknowledged the debt and provided Jake with a means to call on them if needed. The sun was descending toward afternoon when Jake made his decision. He would tell someone, but not the government. Not yet. First, he needed to talk to someone he trusted, someone with wisdom and perspective that went beyond his own. Maria Rodriguez, the ranch owner, was 83 years old and had seen more of life than anyone Jake knew. She'd grown up during World War II, had watched humanity reach the moon, had survived cancer and heartbreak and more challenges than most people could imagine. If anyone could help him figure out the right path forward, it was Maria. Jake gathered the alien gifts carefully, wrapping them in his bedroll and securing them to Copper's saddle. The communicator he tucked into his shirt pocket, where it rested against his heart like a talisman or a time bomb. He wasn't sure which. Then he mounted up and turned Copper toward home, beginning the long ride back with the weight of cosmic secrets pressing down on his shoulders. As he rode, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Not by anything visible, not by Silver's people or their enemies, but by the universe itself, holding its breath to see what this ordinary human would do with knowledge and power beyond his understanding. The desert stretched out in all directions, vast and ancient, keeping its secrets as it had for millennia. But now Jake carried a secret that dwarfed anything the desert had ever hidden. The afternoon shadows were lengthening by the time Jake spotted something that made him pull Copper to a stop. There, in the sand beside the trail, was a patterned geometric shapes and symbols that glowed faintly even in daylight. It was similar to the designs he'd seen on Silver's skin and armor, but different too, more elaborate. And it was fresh, drawn or burned into the sand recently. Jake dismounted and knelt beside the pattern, studying it carefully without touching. Was it a message? A marker? Some kind of alien graffiti? As he watched, the glow faded and the pattern began to dissolve, sand filling in the shapes until within minutes, no trace remained. Whatever it had been, it was gone now, leaving Jake to wonder if he'd really seen it at all. But he knew he had. Just like he knew that his life had changed irrevocably, that the universe had opened a door he couldn't close, and that ahead lay challenges and choices that would test everything he believed about courage, duty, and what it meant to do right in a cosmos far more complex than he'd ever imagined. Jake remounted and continued riding, the communicator warm against his chest, the gift secured to his saddle, and one thought circling endlessly through his mind. He defed a starving stranger because it was the right thing to do. That simple act had brought an army to his doorstep. What would happen next was anyone's guess. But Jake knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wouldn't face it alone. He had all eyes now, friends among the stars, and the courage to stand firm whatever came. Jake didn't go back to the ranch house. Not right away. Instead, he sat on the wooden steps of the line shack for hours, the alien communicator resting in his lap, his mind struggling to integrate what he'd witnessed into any framework that made sense. Copper grazed nearby, seemingly unbothered now that the aliens had departed, as if she'd already processed and moved past the morning as impossible events with the pragmatic wisdom that animals possessed. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and the desert heat built around him, but Jake barely noticed. He kept replaying the sequence of events, looking for the moment when reality had shifted, when his ordinary life had intersected with something vast and cosmic. Had it been when he decided to stop and investigate the figure in the sand? Or had it been predetermined, some invisible thread of fate drawing him to that exact spot at that exact time? He examined the communicator closely in the daylight. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No buttons or screens. Just a smooth surface that shifted colors like Silver's skin had, pulsing with a gentle inner light. When Jake held it, it felt warm and somehow alive, and he wondered if it was responding to his touch, his body heat, or something more subtle like his thoughts or intentions. What would happen if he activated it? Would the ships return? Would he be speaking directly to Silver, or the copper-eyed leader, or some vast alien command structure? The responsibility of it weighed on him. This wasn't like the radio back at the ranch house, where he could call for help with a down fence or injured cattle. This was a connection to beings who commanded technology that made humanity look like children playing with sticks in the dirt. And that raised troubling questions. If aliens possessed such advanced technology, such obvious power, why had Silver been alone and dying in the desert? Had it been an accident, an exploration gone wrong? Or had Silver been fleeing from something? Jake remembered the alien's agitation in the night, the way it had sensed something approaching that Jake's human senses couldn't detect. Had there been danger nearby, some threat that had caused Silver's distress? The gifts the warriors had left were piled inside the shack, and Jake finally roused himself to examine them more carefully. Most were completely beyond his comprehension: smooth objects that hummed or glowed, containers filled with substances he couldn't identify. But one item caught his attention, a flat panel about the size of his hand that showed moving images when he picked it up. The images told a story. Jake didn't understand the written symbols that appeared alongside the visuals, but the pictures themselves were clear enough. He saw worlds, planets that weren't Earth, with strange landscapes and unusual skies. He saw beings like Silver and the warriors going about daily lives that seemed simultaneously alien and familiar. They worked, they gathered, they appeared to celebrate and mourn. They were people, Jake realized. Not humans, but people nonetheless, with lives and loves and purposes that mattered to them as much as his life mattered to him. Then the images shifted to something darker. A threat shown as ships of a different design, angular and predatory, moving through space like sharks through water. Battle scenes followed, confusing and violent, where ships like the ones Jake had seen were engaged in desperate combat against superior numbers. The images conveyed a clear message. Silver's people were at war. Jake set the panel down carefully, his understanding of the situation crystallizing into something both clearer and more troubling. Silver hadn't crashed in the desert by accident. The alien had been running, fleeing from enemies, and had nearly died in the attempt. Jake's intervention hadn't just saved a life, it had saved someone important in the middle of an interstellar conflict. And the warrior's appearance had been both gratitude and strategic response. The communicator in his lap suddenly felt heavier. These people, Silver's people, were fighting for their survival against an enemy Jake knew nothing about. By saving Silver, had Jake inadvertently entangled Earth in an alien war? Were those predatory ships now aware of Earth's location? Did Silver's presence in the desert put humanity at risk? The questions multiplied, each more troubling than the last. Jake stood and paced, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust. He needed advice, needed to tell someone what had happened. But who? If he went to the authorities, they'd take the communicator, probably lock him up for observation, and definitely involve the military. The thought of generals and politicians getting their hands on this connection to an advanced alien civilization made Jake's stomach turn. Humanity wasn't ready for this. Hell, Jake wasn't ready for this. But keeping it secret felt equally wrong. This was bigger than one cowboy's decision. This was first contact, proof of extraterrestrial life, and potentially the opening move in a cosmic conflict that could sweep across Earth like wildfire. Did Jake have the right to make decisions about something this monumental on his own? He thought about Silver's eyes, the gratitude and trust he'd seen there. He thought about the copper-eyed leader's bow, the respect shown by those 180 warriors. They had chosen to trust him, to give him this gift and this burden. They could have just taken Silver and left, owing humanity nothing. Instead, they had acknowledged the debt and provided Jake with a means to call on them if needed. The sun was descending toward afternoon when Jake made his decision. He would tell someone, but not the government. Not yet. First, he needed to talk to someone he trusted, someone with wisdom and perspective that went beyond his own. Maria Rodriguez, the ranch owner, was 83 years old and had seen more of life than anyone Jake knew. She'd grown up during World War II, had watched humanity reach the moon, had survived cancer and heartbreak and more challenges than most people could imagine. If anyone could help him figure out the right path forward, it was Maria. Jake gathered the alien gifts carefully, wrapping them in his bedroll and securing them to Copper's saddle. The communicator he tucked into his shirt pocket, where it rested against his heart like a talisman or a time bomb. He wasn't sure which. Then he mounted up and turned Copper toward home, beginning the long ride back with the weight of cosmic secrets pressing down on his shoulders. As he rode, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Not by anything visible, not by Silver's people or their enemies, but by the universe itself, holding its breath to see what this ordinary human would do with knowledge and power beyond his understanding. The desert stretched out in all directions, vast and ancient, keeping its secrets as it had for millennia. But now Jake carried a secret that dwarfed anything the desert had ever hidden. The afternoon shadows were lengthening by the time Jake spotted something that made him pull Copper to a stop. There, in the sand beside the trail, was a pattern of geometric shapes and symbols that glowed faintly even in daylight. It was similar to the designs he'd seen on Silver's skin and armor, but different too, more elaborate. And it was fresh, drawn or burned into the sand recently. Jake dismounted and knelt beside the pattern, studying it carefully without touching. Was it a message? A marker? Some kind of alien graffiti? As he watched, the glow faded and the pattern began to dissolve, sand filling in the shapes until within minutes, no trace remained. Whatever it had been, it was gone now, leaving Jake to wonder if he'd really seen it at all. But he knew he had, just like he knew that his life had changed irrevocably, that the universe had opened a door he couldn't close, and that ahead lay challenges and choices that would test everything he believed about courage, duty, and what it meant to do right in a cosmos far more complex than he'd ever imagined. Jake remounted and continued riding, the communicator warm against his chest, the gifts secured to his saddle, and one thought circling endlessly through his mind. He defed a starving stranger because it was the right thing to do. That simple act had brought an army to his doorstep. What would happen next was anyone's guess. But Jake knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wouldn't face it alone. He had allies now, friends among the stars, and the courage to stand firm whatever came. The 3 days that followed Jake's call to the stars were the most chaotic in human history. Governments scrambled, militaries mobilized, and panic spread across the globe as the alien armada made no attempt to hide its presence. Conspiracy theories that had been dismissed as lunacy for decades were suddenly, terrifyingly vindicated. We were not alone. We had never been alone. But amid the chaos, something remarkable happened. Silver's people, the Kalari, as they called themselves, didn't hide or intimidate. Led by Silver and Kyre, they began communicating with Earth's leaders through Jake, who found himself thrust into a role he'd never imagined: humanity as ambassador to an alien civilization. The ranch house became a nexus point between worlds, with representatives from every major nation arriving to meet the beings who promised to stand in Earth's defense. Maria watched it all with the amused detachment of someone who lived long enough to be surprised by very little. You know, she told Jake during a rare quiet moment, my grandfather would have loved this. He always said the desert knew how to bring people together. The translation technology the Kalari provided improved rapidly, adapting to human languages with each conversation. Silver, recovering more each day, became the primary liaison, explaining the situation with patience that Jake found humbling. The Void Hunters, Silver told the assembled human leaders, were a plague that had spread across multiple star systems. They didn't conquer or colonize, they consumed, stripping worlds of resources and leaving nothing but dead husks floating in space. They found the Kalari homeworld 70 years ago by your reckoning, Silver explained, the translation device rendering emotion as well as words now. We fought them. We fled them. We've been running and hiding ever since, trying to find allies, trying to survive long enough to find a way to stop them. When I crashed on your world, I believed I would die alone, far from home. Instead, I found what the Kalari have been searching for: proof that kindness exists even in the darkest places of the universe. The story moved many who heard it, but hard questions remained. Could Earth's weapons harm the Void Hunters? Would the Kalari fleet be enough? What happened to humanity if the defense failed? Jake listened to the debates and arguments, the military posturing and political maneuvering, and felt increasingly disconnected from it all. These people saw the situation through the lens of power and survival. They weren't wrong, but they were missing something essential. On the night before the Void Hunters were expected to arrive, Jake walked out into the desert, needing space from the crowds and cameras and constant decisions. He found Silver waiting there, as if the alien had known he would come. The being's skin shimmered in the starlight, healthier now, that remarkable quality of color and light fully restored. You are troubled, Silver said, and it wasn't a question. I'm scared, Jake admitted. I keep thinking about the choice I made stopping to help you, calling for the fleet. What if it's not enough? What if bringing you here just meant the Void Hunters destroyed Earth along with the Kalari? Did I doom my people by trying to save them? Silver was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars. On my world, we have a saying. Translated, it means roughly, the light you share multiplies, while the darkness you hoard consumes. You shared your light with me when you had every reason to preserve it for yourself. That act multiplied, bringing my people, bringing hope, bringing alliance. Whatever comes tomorrow, it comes to being standing together instead of facing destruction alone. That is not doom. That is the only path to salvation that has ever existed. Jake felt something in his chest loosen, a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. Will we win? I don't know. The Void Hunters are powerful, and this fleet, while large, is not our full strength. We are refugees, Jake, not an empire. But we have something they don't. Silver turned those silver eyes on him. We have remembered why survival matters. They consume because it's all they know. We fight because we've experienced mercy and want to preserve a universe where such things are possible. The night passed with agonizing slowness. Jake tried to sleep, but couldn't. Instead, spending the hours sitting on the porch with Maria, Copper nearby, watching the Kalari ships maintain their defensive positions. When dawn finally came, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, it came with them. The Void Hunters didn't tear space like the Kalari had. They emerged differently, their ships bleeding into reality like oil spreading across water. They were massive, dwarfing even the largest Kalari vessels, and they moved with a terrible purpose that needed no translation. These were not explorers or refugees. These were predators who had found new prey. The battle that followed would be analyzed by historians and military strategists for generations. The Kalari fleet moved with desperate precision, their ships coordinating in patterns that suggested hive mind efficiency or incredibly advanced AI. They focused their weapons on the Void Hunter vessel's propulsion systems, trying to cripple rather than destroy, buying time for Earth's evacuation protocols to activate, for the millions in vulnerable coastal cities to move to prepared shelters. But the Void Hunters were winning. Slowly, inexorably, their superior firepower and shields were overwhelming the Kalari defense. Jake watched from the ranch, where Kyre had insisted he remain, safe from the battle raging in orbit. He watched Kalari ships fall, burning as they descended through the atmosphere, their crews dying to protect the world they barely met. We have to do something, Jake said to Kyre, who stood beside him, coordinating the defense through some kind of neural link. There has to be something Earth can do to help. Kyre's copper eyes met his. Your weapons are too primitive. They would be destroyed before they could engage. The only help your people can offer is to survive what comes after. We knew this might be a final stand. We chose to make it anyway because of what you showed us, that some things are worth dying for. Jake's hand went to his pocket, where the communicator still rested, warm and alive. An idea formed, reckless and probably suicidal, but the only one he had. The communicator had sent a signal through space faster than light, didn't it? To call your fleet? Yes, through the quantum network we established. Why do you care's expression changed as understanding dawned. No, Jake, no. If you amplify that signal, broadcast it as a distress call across all frequencies, you will be announcing Earth's location to every species in this region of the galaxy. Most ignore such calls. Some would answer to help. But others would come to investigate, would see the Void Hunters attacking, would have to choose whether to help or leave. Jake was already moving, heading for the central Kalari command ship where Silver was coordinating medical teams. It's a chance. Maybe the only one we have. The next hour blurred. Silver, understanding immediately what Jake proposed, led him to the ship's communications array, a room that looked like it belonged inside a living crystal, walls pulsing with light and information. The Kalari technicians protested, but Silver overrode them with authority. Jake hadn't realized the alien possessed. This is what brought you to our aid, Silver told them. A call sent in desperation, answered out of compassion. If we die today, let it be while extending that same hope to others. They modified the communicator, amplifying its signal through the ship's array, and when Jake activated it one final time, he poured everything into it. Not just a call for help, but a message. We are here. We chose to stand together. We need you. The signal exploded outward, writing quantum pathways that connected vast reaches of space, announcing Earth's presence to civilizations that had remained hidden or distant for millennia. For several minutes, nothing changed. The battle continued, the Void Hunters pressing their advantage, Kalari ships falling. Then they came. First one, then another, then dozens ships of designs neither Kalari nor Void Hunter. Some were elegant vessels that looked grown rather than built. Others were angular and militaristic. Some were so alien in configuration that Jake couldn't determine which end was forward. They emerged from various forms of faster-than-light travel, and after the briefest hesitation, opened fire on the Void Hunters. The tide turned. The newcomers weren't coordinated, weren't even apparently in communication with each other, but they had all made the same choice. The distress call had been answered, and whoever these beings were, they had decided that the Void Hunters were a threat worth opposing. The battle lasted another 3 hours. The Void Hunters, faced with overwhelming opposition, attempted to retreat, but the combined fleet pursued relentlessly. When it finally ended, debris floated in orbit wreckage from all sides, but Earth was intact, and the Void Hunter force was destroyed. The various species that had answered the call withdrew quickly, most without attempting communication, as if they preferred anonymity even in their heroism. But a few remained, and over the following days, representatives from 5 different civilizations made contact with Earth and the Kalari. An impromptu council formed, meeting at the ranch where the whole improbable series of events had begun. Jake sat in that council, feeling absurdly out of place among beings from across the stars, but Silver insisted he remain. "You began this," the alien said simply. "You should see what you've created." What emerged from those meetings was unprecedented. The various species, having been forced to fight together, recognized the advantage in maintaining communication. The Void Hunters weren't the only threat in the galaxy, and isolation had left too many civilizations vulnerable. They agreed to form a loose alliance, not a government or military structure, but a network for sharing information and, when necessary, providing mutual defense. And Earth, thrust into this cosmic community through Jake's simple act of mercy, became a founding member of what would eventually be known as the Coalition of Free Worlds. It wasn't the optimistic first contact humanity had imagined in its science fiction. It was messier, more complicated, and fraught with challenges that would take generations to navigate. But it was real, and it was built on a foundation of compassion rather than conquest. Maria died 3 weeks after the battle, peacefully in her sleep, content that she'd lived to see humanity's place in the stars secured. At her funeral, attended by humans and aliens alike, Silver spoke through the translation device, words that would be quoted in 1,000 languages across 100 worlds. Maria Rodriguez taught me that wisdom isn't knowing all the answers. It's knowing which questions matter. Her grandson taught me that mercy isn't weakness. It's the foundation on which all true civilizations must build. Earth has given the galaxy a great gift, a reminder of what we fight for and who we hope to be. Jake remained at the ranch, refusing all offers of fame, fortune, or political position. He continued working cattle, continued riding the desert, though now he occasionally had alien visitors who wanted to see where it had all begun. He never activated the communicator again, didn't need to. The Kalari had established an embassy in what had been Maria's house, and Silver visited regularly, working now as a cultural liaison, but always making time for long conversations with the cowboy who had saved its life. On quiet nights, Jake would sit on the porch and look up at the stars, no longer distant and cold, but alive with the knowledge of friends and allies. He thought about the choice he'd made, stopping for a dying stranger in the desert. He thought about Maria's words about simple choices made by ordinary people. And he thought about the fact that the most extraordinary moment in human history had started with the most ordinary human impulse, seeing someone in need and choosing to help. The universe was vast, stranger than anyone had imagined, and filled with both wonder and terror. But it was also, Jake had learned, a place where kindness mattered, where mercy created ripples that spread farther than light itself, and where sometimes, just sometimes, one brave act by one ordinary person could change the fate of worlds. As the desert wind whispered through the mesquite and the stars shone bright above, Jake Martinez, cowboy and accidental ambassador, felt at peace. He had shared his last water with a stranger, and in return, the stranger had shared the universe with him. It was, he reflected, a fair trade. And in the morning, there would be fences to mend and cattle to check, ships to greet and alliances to maintain, a new world to navigate and an old life to preserve. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, there was just the desert, the stars, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done right and lived to see it matter. The end came not with dramatic finality, but with the understanding that this was just the beginning. Earth's story among the stars was barely started, shaped by the choices of billions yet to come. But it had started right with compassion, with courage, and with a lonely cowboy who'd been brave enough to feed a starving alien and wise enough to accept what came after. Sometimes, that's all the universe asks of us, to be brave when it matters, kind when we can, and willing to stand beside those we choose to call friends, no matter how strange or distant their home might be. Jake Martinez had done all that and more. And the galaxy, vast and ancient and full of mysteries, had noticed. In the end, that was his legacy, not the battle won or the alliance formed, but the simple truth that one person's mercy could light a path through the darkness, bringing hope where there had been none and building bridges across the infinite distance between stars. It was a legacy worthy of a brave cowboy, and a testament to the power of kindness in a universe that desperately needed reminding why such things mattered. And as the night deepened and the desert sang its eternal song, Jake smiled content in the knowledge that he had lived a life that meant something not just to his world, but to all the worlds that watched the stars and wondered what waited there. He had his answer now, and it was better than he'd ever dared to hope. They waited for us, friends among the stars. All we had to do was show them we deserved their friendship. One cowboy, one alien, one simple act of mercy. That's all it took to change everything. And that, in the end, was the greatest story ever told. Tenter novamente.